let me try to make an analogy. When you talk about a city, where do you live? You live in Brooklyn or something?
Yeah,
Brooklyn. You talk about
something.
Brooklyn. We know that
Yeah.
Brooklyn has historically changed. So Brooklyn, as a pointer, um, changes. Brooklyn of 1850, of the gangs of New York, whatever. By the way, I had a time in Brooklyn. I used to live in Avenue X back in the 90s. Used to
That's
sell,
crazy.
used to
Yeah.
sell mace and beer on Brighton Beach back in the day.
I love it, man.
Yeah, and not to get to get ethnic here, the Jewish mafia helped protect us a little bit from the Italian mafia because the ice cream vendor was like, "You're stepping on my turf," and he was with the Italian folks. Anyway, the you talk about Brooklyn, it's always legit to talk about Brooklyn, but if someone just said, "Let's talk about Brooklyn historically," you'd want to know what exact moment because it's not, Brooklyn has changed incessantly, and you can point at it, but it's hard to say what is exactly the same between Brooklyn of 1850 and Brooklyn of 2024. There are things you could identify as continuous and many, many things that have changed. Now, there probably are all sorts of, in every era, there's always been those who might have clamored for the preservation of the identity of Brooklyn. So they're choosing certain aspects of its current endless fluid transformation and declaring those things should be fixed eternally. Let's say the characteristic of Brooklyn um, is the wooden roller coaster at Coney Island. Well, I think that burnt down twice and then hasn't been replaced for, I think maybe I've been there for a long time, but maybe it's not a wooden roller coaster. But as someone who has that as the identity of Brooklyn would insist that Coney Island's wooden roller coaster is an intrinsic part of what could be pointed to as Brooklyn and should always be there. So we talk about the self. It's like a city. It's always changing. There's parts that you can identify as continuous and parts that uh, change, that don't change. And so self is a what we call a pointer or indexical. And there's nothing, you can't even say there's nothing wrong with self. That's like saying there's something wrong with pointing over there and say that's Brooklyn. Um, Identity can be problematic because um, it's often associated with attempt to fix guaranteed, eternally fixed parts of that pattern. And that, of course, creates friction in responsiveness and in being in the world because, um, as you can see with development, anything that's you try to keep permanently fixed eventually just isn't appropriate anymore.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how identity becomes a problem and having a fixed self. Like, if I have a certain self image or a certain self that I like or I want to inhabit, and then I'm in an interaction and that's not getting propped up or that's not getting reflected, then I feel upset or or maybe I don't like that person. Now I don't want to come around them because they're not reflecting me in a particular way that I like to see. So I see how that, having a rigid self or having favorite selves and then not wanting to feel a different flavor of self that might arise in an interaction, because the self is not within me. It's not within, there's no inherent self. It's an interaction between environments and relationships and people.
Mm-hmm. And there's not, and identity can also be positively a generative thing. So you can take on identity as something like I am a podcaster, and that identity um, leads you into podcasting. So the question of so I don't think there's anything problematic intrinsically with identity. It's just that the level of, again, it's we always get to fixity or compulsion. It's the compulsion plus identity. So compulsion identity is not only here is what we're trying to create as a stable pattern of selfing, but and this really needs to stay stable, as opposed to sort of like, oh yes, let's try to build a stable house and hopefully it'll work out. So identity can be used generatively, but that sense of when you that feeling of, oh, this wounded my identity, that only occurs because there's a compulsive or fixed attempt to have um, the identity uh, be stable, stay there. not merely as a focus, but as a permanent eternal thing, as a soul, as they used to call it.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you bring up the how identity could be used in a positive way, and I feel like, like in a lot of like productivity literature and stuff like that, they actually say that if you want to achieve a particular goal, it makes sense to have a certain identity, but it's very easy for it to go overboard. And, like I could give an example from my own life. I was very into lifting weights for a long time, right? Like I developed a strong identity of like, I'm somebody who works out, I'm somebody who's fit. But then if I ever got sick or I got hurt and I couldn't lift, there was like some kind of distress. It's like, oh my God, I'm not going to go to the gym for a week. And it's actually interesting now because during COVID, I ended up, my body had like a freak reaction, which like damaged my spine and basically made it really difficult to walk. So I can't really lift weights or do any of the stuff that I used to do. And it's just kind of life was like, yeah, you can't do it anyway. Now you really can't do it. But I just remember how like that slowly fell away. But I remember there was such a rigid identity around that if I got sick or I got hurt and I couldn't lift, it was like, oh my God, that now I won't be big or I won't be strong or whatever,
Yeah, and there can be a playful and welcoming and warm identity as a lifter that can be very positive. So the in general, the line between the single thing that is to be rooted out, or that is what is the problem in the grand sense. I think I would say, if I had to say what is the problem, is any sense of existential compulsion. And the thing about that when there's no existential compulsion, that actually doesn't look like anything in particular, because we're just saying, well, states move freely, or this way or that way, identities move freely, the self moves freely. We're just not trying to lock it all down as a sort of function of oh my God, it's got to be this way. So it doesn't necessarily look hardly at all different than ordinary life, though from the inside, ordinary life now feels generally fantastic, whether you are sick with COVID or or having explosive diarrhea, or having someone on the street um, uh, yell at you for having not for having driven your car in a way they don't like. It's like it's all good.
Yeah, I feel like that is like a common saying where it's like nothing changes, but everything changes. And I think in your writing, there was like a piece you said, like, it's like you still have the same states, but it's like the way you relate to them is different. So you could still have that sadness or the fear, but you relate to it different. And I think one of the things you said is like the recognition of the nature of states. It's like knowing like this is not what it is. This is not the truth. It's just um it's just a state that's going to change. That's transitional.
Yeah, or it's not eternal. It's not. There's never. It just yeah. And then and then what do you do with life? It's a responsive play. That's good responsiveness. Becomes a responsive play, um, because there really isn't that much separation between self and or me and context or something like that. So what happens is extremely is there's nothing that can really be said. In every given person, their responsive play will look differently once they um, are no longer trying to cram an agenda down their psyche, something like that.